Fortune favors the bold, which is why billionaire Eric Sprott and legendary investor Rick Rule are taking advantage of the lowest valuations of the mining sector in over 3 decades by accumulating millions of shares of this tiny new stock led by Keith Neumeyer, a mining entrepreneur who has already built 2 separate billion-dollar companies. This new venture, starting with 18 assets on day one, including gold, silver, copper, and zinc projects, has already identified 60 additional quality assets in distressed companies that management will work to acquire. To learn more about this incredible opportunity, visit futuremoneytrends.com/fortune.
Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I'm here with Jeff Berwick. He is kind of been a mentor of mine, but he doesn't even know it. I've been watching his YouTube videos and listening to Anarchist for quite some time now. First learned about him through Doug Casey and his site Dollar Vigilante. Prior to Dollar Vigilante, Jeff ran a site, Stockhouse, which I'm sure we'll get into because I'd like to cover some business tips for people who are looking to thrive in the new economy. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, hey, Jeff, I want to kick us off with parenting for the anarchist or the libertarian, because in these times it's somewhat unprecedented, at least for the new libertarians and new anarchists. It's not as if there's an entire generation that was raised by anarchists or libertarians, but now with all the information on the web, we're all kind of doing this for our first time, and I'm sure many of us are stumbling our way through it. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on raising a child today.
Yeah, well, a very interesting topic. I have 2 of my own children. They're 8 and 10 years old. And we live in Acapulco, Mexico, and things are so much cheaper here in terms of schooling, private schooling, of course. I would never send my kids to a public indoctrination camp in any country. As a libertarian or an anarchist, it'd be crazy to send your kids to the enemy's indoctrination camp to do their Pledge of Allegiance and all the crazy things they do there in their cult. But here they have a Montessori school, which I really like, actually. It's amazing. They essentially, it's the way it should be. It's, they ask the kids what they want to learn, and then they help them learn it through games and through play. And my kids just love it. And actually, and I should just let you know, it's about $400 a month here in Acapulco. I think in the U.S. it's often over $4,000 a month. So everything down here is quite a bit cheaper and easier and better in most ways. But I'm actually really gotten into something called unschooling over the years. I met Dana Martin a few years ago, and she's, I would say she's the world's leading expert, the most well-known expert on unschooling, and she's written many books. She's been on CBS and ABC, and I think she's on Oprah Winfrey or Dr. Phil and all these sort of things. And it was very interesting because she didn't know she was an anarchist when she met me, and we met through the internet. But I'd seen her on a Stefan Molyneux video, and I got really interested in what she was talking about. So I contacted her, and I said, "Are you an anarchist?" She said, "I don't know. What's an anarchist?" And I said, "Well, you just don't want to be ruled by anybody. You don't want people to use guns and violence and to steal your money." And she's like, "Oh, well, yeah, definitely I'm an anarchist." And she said, "What I'm really into, though, is unschooling." And she has, I think, 3 or 4 children. And none of them have ever been inside of a school, and they're amazing. I've met one of her daughters in person. I've seen her son on the internet all the time. He's, I believe, around 14 or 15, and he's already started like 5 businesses. He's got like he makes swords, and he's got like I forget what you call it, metalwork sort of stuff. And he started up like his own confectionery business online when he was like 8 years old or something. So that's the kind of thing that people don't fully realize, and these are sort of new topics to a lot of people, is people assume that you have to go to school, and government school, to learn. In fact, that's actually not true at all. First of all, most things that you learn in the government schools are either useless or wrong. If you're studying U.S. history, for example, where they'll tell you Abraham Lincoln was a hero who freed the slaves when he was actually a massive fascist that overtook the South to turn it into a massive fascist state. If you even go to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, he's got his hand on 2 fasces, which is the symbols for fascism, which is a bundle of sticks tied together with rope, which means you want to have a strong state and rule people with authority and all that sort of thing. So you're going to learn that in the public indoctrination camps, which isn't really learning because it's not really true. And you're also going to be wasting a lot of time. I don't know about you, but when I went to the full 12 years of indoctrination, and I hated it. I just it was useless. I barely even went most of the time because I just despised it, and I found it just a total waste of time. And so, yeah, there's so many other options out there. A lot of libertarians are very into homeschooling. Ron Paul has his own homeschooling course out now, which is much better than anything that you would ever get in a public school or even a private school, most private schools. Tom Woods also has his own. So there's a lot of resources out there now for people who want to treat their children better, not force them to go to public schools, to government schools, and force them to get this piece of paper, which is totally useless. And then oftentimes they'll go for 4 more years after that to get their Bachelor of Arts or Women's Studies and get a few $100,000 in debt that they can never get rid of and never absolve even during bankruptcy, and essentially go into debt slavery for life. And at the age of 22, and they still haven't learned anything or done anything. That's even more important. You hear about all these college kids that get out and they're like, no one will hire me because I don't know how to do anything. It's like, yeah, you just wasted 22 years there not doing anything. Of course, you need some experience. That's what life's all about. So, yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and something that's really growing right now is homeschooling and unschooling in the libertarian movement.
How about in the home when it comes to discipline or, teaching children to eat right, for example?
Well, the word discipline I don't like at all. I treat children the way that I treat adults. So, for example, if you said something or you did something like you hurt your finger there, I wouldn't slap you and go, don't do that. If you said something I don't like, I wouldn't be like, go to your room. You'd be like, what? So you just treat them like human beings. And you'd be amazed, and I've always done this with my kids, even before I knew about homeschooling or unschooling or any of these sort of things. I just sense that's the way that you should treat children, like with respect. And treat them as a human being, which is what they are, not as some little thing that you control and tell them what to do. And I've done that with both my kids, and they are the most polite, kindest, nicest, friendliest children I've ever met in my life. And I've never yelled at them. I've definitely never hit them. And I don't tell them what to do. And I actually tell them, I say, you sure you want to go to school? It's kind of a waste of time. You could be just learning whatever you want here on the internet. And they're like, no, we love it. So these are different ways to treat children. And I think the whole authoritarian disciplinary thing, this is something that I think is terrible. It really trains kids, and they grow up to do the same things to their own kids, that if you do something wrong, you're going to get hit or punished. And it really changes the child dramatically, because they're scared to try anything, which is what an entrepreneur or a free-minded person would want to do, is to try things, because they're scared that someone's going to hit them or put them in jail or anything like that. So, for example, with my daughter, when she was like 6, she was standing on this like 8-foot sort of a wall, and she said to me, I'm going to jump off. And I said, I would advise you not to do that. And she's like, why? I'm like, well, you're only like 3 feet tall, and this is like 8 feet. So you could seriously hurt yourself. You could definitely break your ankle or something like that. And she said, really? I said, well, if you want, try it and you'll see for yourself, but I would advise you not to. Whereas, a lot of parents would go, get down, and hit them or send them to their room. And because I've treated my children that way, it's amazing the results. They don't rebel, because there's nothing to rebel against. They're very happy. They come to me for advice. They treat me as a trusted person. So if they have a question about what should I do, they come to me very openly and ask, because they know that I just give them good advice, and I do my best to give them the best advice I can. And that's the sort of relationship I have with my children.
That's great. So, I mean, now is there any intervention? I mean, if the child just wants to eat candy all day or drink soda pop, play video games all day, I mean, when do you intervene and say, hey, look, this is probably going to hurt you. You shouldn't do that.
I've never really seen that, because they trust us so much, and we treat them so well that they really have, so for example, my wife and I, we eat fairly healthily. My wife is incredibly healthy. She eats nothing but the most healthy things you can imagine, organic and raw and all that kind of stuff. I'm fairly close to that, but I still will have a pizza or a taco from time to time. And kids will mimic or follow what you're doing. And so and we live here in Mexico, so everything's so fresh. So all these juices every day. We have watermelon juice or lime juice, which is amazing, by the way. It's so good, it's so tasty and so good for you. All these fresh juices every day. All these flowers they use down here called Jamaica and all these things. And so they've just grown up drinking that. And they love it. So we'll have other kids over to the house sometimes, and they'll want a Coca-Cola or something. And my kids will be like, "Ooh, that's it's so sweet," and all that kind of stuff, because they're just used to eating or drinking what we've been eating and drinking. My kids do like candy though, but they will have a couple pieces, and then they'll go, "My stomach hurts," and I'll go, "Yeah, you probably shouldn't eat that much candy." And that's how I treat them, and it's really not an issue if you treat your kids in that way.
Now you're in Acapulco. A big, I guess, misconception out there, especially with Americans, is that everywhere outside of the U.S. is dangerous. So are you in fear right now as we're talking? Is your kidney in any danger of being kidnapped this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm watching my back right now. The media and the government just puts out this fear. That's really what they do, is try to make people just fear everything. That's what the media is there to do, is to just make you fearful of everything. And then what that does is it makes you stay in your city where you live. You don't want to leave because you hear it's really dangerous in the other city over the mountains over there, and keep your mortgage and go to your job for your entire life and just go do your 9 to 5 and that sort of thing. That's sort of like the system that they put in place, fear-based system. Anyone who's traveled, however, will know that the U.S. is actually one of the most dangerous places in the world, in my opinion. There's not many places in the world that I consider it to be fairly dangerous as the U.S. I'd say North Korea, Venezuela at the moment, because of what they're going through with their latest communist round of communism. Of course, then there's all the places that the U.S. has destroyed, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya, all these places that the empire has destroyed. They're probably worse as well, but that's because of the U.S. government. But in general, a lot of people say about Mexico, they'll say, I hear quite a few people get kidnapped in Mexico. And I'm like, well, you know that millions of people get kidnapped and extorted every year in the U.S., right? And they're like, what? That's crazy. I'm like, well, when a cop pulls you over for no reason and wants money for something that there was no victim, and if you don't pay it, he's going to kidnap you and put you in a cage. That happens literally every second of every day, and you're lucky if he doesn't shoot you now. So I consider the U.S. to be quite dangerous, and to me, Mexico is totally fine. I have no concerns here at all in terms of safety. Of course, just like anywhere, you have to be smart. You don't want to go to the wrong bar at the wrong time and talk to the wrong people. But if you're just smart and you take care of yourself, and you're generally not going to have any problems here.
Yeah, so if you wanted to hop on their freeway, saying just drive north and head to California, you would be perfectly fine on the highways?
Oh yeah, like my wife. It's funny because I had this one guy. He was a Canadian guy, and he's like 6'4", and like a hockey player or something. And he was a friend of a friend, and he came down here, and he was acting all scared. He's like, "Should I go out after dark?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like he even asked me. He said, "Is it safe for me to go in a taxi by myself?" And I looked up at this giant man, and I said, "What do you think they're gonna do? Rape you?" Like this fear that they put into people. My wife, as an example, she's from Mexico. She often goes to Mexico City. She just drives there any time of day or night without a care or a thought of concern. It's no different than going in the U.S. In fact, it's better because all the highways here, for the most part, are private toll roads, so they're much better. There generally isn't any cops. There's definitely no speed traps or anything like that. So it's much better and much safer, in my opinion.